It's part 2 of Mockingjay and the finale of the Hunger Games franchise. It came out, I think, 2 weeks ago. I saw it that Saturday, and now I'm finally able to review it. Yeah, I've been backed up. I'm not going to talk too much about the plot of this movie because you've probably already figured this out if you've been following any of the Hunger Games movies. This is the second part to Mockingjay because it's a trend now. The last books that are adapted into films get split into 2 movies. Or in the case of The Hobbit, it gets split into 3. But it starts off right where it left off. Katniss is dealing with Peeta, and Peeta is just... he's messed up in the head. You still get a little bit of the political thriller stuff in the first part of the film, but basically she doesn't want to be a pawn anymore. She wants to break free and take her fight to the Capitol. She's with a group of people and they are taking their fight in their own little squadron, taking down and trying to assassinate Snow. But of course the Capitol is booby-trapped with all these different traps, all the types of things that are in the Hunger Games. And so now it feels like the Capitol is its own little Hunger Games battlefield. Now I am a fan of the Hunger Games. They're one of the few franchises that are based off of young adult novels that were really entertaining and really great, actually good movies. Now there are quite a few still that are good young adult novel movie adaptations, but for the most part, most of them are just either sort of bad or just kind of good because they're so bad, or just sort of meh. Hunger Games was one of the few franchises that really broke out and really did some really good stuff with it. And for me, I have liked all 4 of the Hunger Games films. All of them would get 4 stars or higher for me. I really enjoyed the last film of the Hunger Games franchise, and I thought Mockingjay Part 2 was a really solid finale to the whole franchise. It is definitely more action-packed than the previous part, which makes sense because, let's face it, most of the Hunger Games, well, the first 2 Hunger Games, were split into 2 different parts pretty much. The first part dealt with all the political and the social commentary and all that sort of aspects of outside the Hunger Games, while the second half was the more action-packed moment where you actually see the Hunger Games themselves. And so for Mockingjay Part 1, it was more of the political thriller aspect, while this one is more of the action-packed one. Now it still has a little bit of a slower build-up because it's still building up from where the first movie left off, and so there's a little bit more political thriller aspects to it. There's a little bit more psychological drama. There's a few different things that help build up to the action, so it's not over-the-top crazy action throughout the whole movie. But everything that they've done well in the previous films was done well in Mockingjay Part 2. So if you're a fan of the other movies, then you'll probably like Mockingjay too. There was a lot of crazy and cool traps, and some that could have been downright graphic if it had been a rated R movie. But it's PG-13, so it's going to cut away from some of it. But that doesn't lessen the fact that there are some really gruesome traps that, if we saw the full extent of them, we could imagine just how bad some people could be mangled from these things. Just like all the other ones, you stick with Katniss's point of view, and so she's in a little bit of a squadron, and you don't get to see as much as the bigger picture as you might want, but there is a few scenes without Katniss that you do see a little bit of the other alliances and all these political figures trying to use her as a pawn and use her to their advantage. There's a lot of solid performances throughout, a lot of great action scenes mingled in with the whole movie. And I have to say, one of the most intense moments of the movie is the sewer scene with the mutts. In all honesty, it kind of becomes a horror movie during that moment in the film, and it's done really effectively. There are moments in the sewer scene where I felt like I was watching Aliens 2, you know, like a mixture of action, suspense, but still really creepy. And then the horde of mutts come, and they're pretty terrifying. They're a lot scarier than the monsters or the infected people in the Scourge trials. Yeah, they're a lot scarier than that, at least. And then during this whole scene, there's 3 moments where you're looking at it, you're like, okay, someone's gonna jump out now. No, okay, well now they are. Okay, still haven't popped out. What about now? Okay. And then when it finally does start happening, it's like a little unexpected. Yes, overall the movie is a little predictable if you look at all the cliches of big Hollywood movies and you know the right cues, so you know kind of what's going to happen in that scene. But overall, it's still a really fun and good movie. It may not be as epic as I would have liked it to be, but I still really enjoyed it and thought it was a solid finale for the franchise. Now I have to say, I heard some complaints about the ending, and I do share some of those complaints. Like, several people thought that it was like Lord of the Rings Return of the King, where it just never ended, and they're like, okay, there's like 3 or 4 different ways it could have ended, but it didn't. And so when the beginning of the end started happening in this film, it got a little bit, okay, they're just trying to tie up all these loose ends in a nice little bow for everyone to understand and get the full grasp of it, but it felt like it was more like an obligation to have some of those scenes in it rather than it actually bring to the overall story. It wasn't until like the final 3 scenes of the ending that I thought, okay, those definitely needed to be in there, and those were good endings. Now, even though this movie is really long, there is some moments where they could have expanded on a few ideas, but a lot of the Hunger Games movies have had that flaw in the past, where they have a really interesting idea, but it doesn't fully flesh out, and you just get little hints of that sort of stuff. And it's not being subtle and ingenious, it's just not feeling like it's fully fleshed out. In the end, I did really enjoy Mockingjay. I thought it was a really nice end to the series, and out of the 4, it would probably be either my 3rd or 2nd best. Catching Fire is definitely my favorite, and Part 1 Mockingjay is the least favorite, but I would still give that one a 4-star. So for Mockingjay Part 2, I'm going to give it 4.5 stars. It's more along the lines of 4.25, like 4.25, but I don't do quarters, so 4.5 stars for now. So have you seen Mockingjay Part 2? What did you think about it? Go ahead and comment. And if not, what is your favorite Hunger Games movie? Mine is Catching Fire, as I've said several times throughout, because that's the only one of those 4 I would legitimately give 5 stars to. And as always, this is Bruce Gifford, and this was Just My Opinion.